Sometimes, a man finds himself drawn to a woman who isn't actively trying to attract him. She doesn't flirt, she doesn't chase attention, there's no calculated game involved. She simply exists, radiating a quiet, confident energy, an inner light that's impossible to overlook. She might not be the most flamboyant person in a room, but you can sense a depth in her that makes you think. It's not a coldness, but a very clear sense of her own personal space, a boundary she doesn't need to explain, but she also doesn't try to hide. It's this very space between her and the world that becomes a magnetic force. A man might sense something of significance behind her quiet demeanor and composure. He feels a puzzle, not related to her physical appearance, but rather her internal wholeness. There's no real logic behind this attraction. He may not be able to articulate why he finds himself constantly thinking about her. Why does his mind keep returning to her gaze, to her quiet strength? In a time when many are trying so hard to be liked, inaccessibility becomes a challenge. It isn't simply a lack of interest, but a loaded silence. As Jung once said, the things that truly attract us rarely stay at a surface level. Often, it's a projection of something we lack ourselves. A woman who knows how to maintain some distance highlights the man's inner voids. He feels it. She possesses a completeness, an independence from him. That is unsettling, because it is beyond his control, and that's the magnet. The anima archetype, deep within the male unconscious, gravitates towards a feminine figure that remains distinctly separate and whole. In the unavailable woman, he feels this archetypal power. She doesn't seek understanding or validation. She's not trying to be his other half. She already feels whole. And so his pull turns into something more profound than a simple attraction. It's a search. He doesn't crave her attention as much as he wants to understand why she evokes these feelings in him. He has the feeling that there's something ancient and intangible within him, a piece he lost long ago, and it is being awakened inside of him by her. Unavailability isn't a strategy. It's a reflection of her internal world. A woman who keeps her distance doesn't do it to be cruel or out of pride. She simply doesn't need external confirmation of her value. She has an inner grounding point, invisible but palpable to those around her. Like the silence in a temple, it doesn't need words, but it commands respect. A man accustomed to readily available and predictable interactions suddenly faces something uncontrollable. It's a hit to his ego, but also an awakening. He might sense that he needs to change in order to connect with a woman like her. He's forced to look inward, to understand why she doesn't fit into his predetermined narratives. And then the distance isn't a barrier. It becomes a mirror, reflecting not her, but him, his weaknesses, his illusions, his immaturity. It's painful and beautiful. A woman's unavailability isn't a denial of love. It's a declaration of wholeness. It says, I won't participate in the game. I am. This quiet declaration is a form of strength. This strength either repels or ignites a desire to become better. The man's inner conflict is stirred. He is drawn in, but he isn't sure how to move closer. And then he faces himself, not her, because a truly mature woman doesn't offer ready-made answers. She's like a mystery that should be respected, not solved, as Jungian psychology suggests. A person who doesn't dissolve into another's projections disrupts the illusion, which is always painful. However, in the process, a genuine connection can be born. A woman who maintains distance gives a man the opportunity, not to conquer her, but to discover himself. And maybe that's why these women have such allure. They don't rescue, they don't comfort, they don't wait. They simply exist, complete, deeply real. And that rarity is beyond advertisement. There are women who are in no hurry to lose themselves in love. They don't let go of who they are, even when they love deeply. They don't become a mystery of what they once were. They are not fragments of themselves when in a relationship, not just a fear of closeness. This is maturity, boundaries and autonomy grown from pain, self-awareness, and a hard-won inner journey. When a man meets a woman like this, he may not understand it at first. She cannot be held, cannot be subdued. She loves, but remains free. She is with him, but not for him. He senses that she's connected to something greater than the mundane, as if an internal source resides within her, independent of external circumstances. And then, an archetype is activated. The man feels that this woman embodies the image of his own soul, the anima, that part of his psyche he has long lost. She awakens him, not because she needs him, but because she remains true to herself. Jung described the anima as a projection through which men strive for wholeness, but only a truly autonomous woman can activate this projection on a deep level. Why? Because she doesn't act as expected. She doesn't become a backdrop for his grandness. She doesn't dissolve into his world. And then he feels a tension, that very tension that pushes him towards growth. He sees in her the part he needs to integrate within himself: sensitivity, intuition, spiritual depth. But as long as he only perceives her as an external woman, he'll struggle with her independence. She becomes inconvenient, too self-sufficient, too calm, too different. He wants her to need him, to depend on him, to follow him. But she refuses to play along. She doesn't give up herself for the sake of love. And in that lies her power. She isn't against the man. She is simply for herself. And that is what unconsciously draws him more strongly than any words or superficial beauty. This woman does not look to impress. She doesn't engage in a never-ending rat race for attention. She looks deeper, and in her gaze, a man senses both acceptance and a challenge. It isn't the gaze of someone judging, but one that sees. She notices him, not only as he is, but as he is capable of becoming. In this lies the archetypal power. She isn't just a partner. She invites him to initiation, yet this invitation isn't external. It's an internal process. Next to her, those parts of himself a man has long avoided become activated: vulnerability, softness, the capacity for self-reflection. In order to hear this call, he has to release his ego. Stop seeing her as an object, stop demanding, and begin looking inward. Because in her, he meets not only a woman, but himself, or who he can become. It's a path, not a romance. It's growth, not comfort. That is why such women are intimidating. That's why such women are awakening. Jungian autonomy isn't a rejection of connection, but the ability to stay connected without losing yourself. A woman who doesn't dissolve into a man becomes a mirror of his spiritual maturity. The more he wants to control, the further she slips away, not because she's playing games, but because she's alive. Her soul belongs not only to love, but also to herself. She is capable of leaving if she feels herself starting to fade. This is not a threat, but maturity. She isn't manipulating. She is choosing. And then the man faces a choice: try to hold her back, or grow to be by her side. This is where the real journey begins. Because the anima woman isn't a trophy, but a signpost. She doesn't provide ready-made answers, but poses the right questions. And if a man is prepared for this journey, he will be transformed. If not, he will reject her, calling her cold or too complicated. But somewhere deep down, he will remember, because such women aren't forgotten. They become an internal symbol of what stirred him, at least for a moment, towards a genuine life. Some women seem to live outside the flow. They don't try to impress, because there is nothing for them to prove. In their presence, one senses a distinct lack of need to attract, explain, or conquer. She simply exists, a whole being, not because her life is perfect, but because she has embraced herself, light and shadow, pain and joy, doubts and strength. A man senses this instantly, feeling drawn even if he struggles to articulate why. It isn't the passion, the excitement, the fleeting attraction he's accustomed to. It is a kind of quiet that is hard to pull away from. This woman isn't a puzzle to solve, but a space in which a man confronts his own incompleteness. Beside her, he might sense a void, not in her, but in himself. Jung wrote that a person is always striving for wholeness because it is his deepest need, to become who he is truly meant to be. But wholeness isn't perfection. It's acknowledging the internal divide, making peace with the shadow, with vulnerability, with what was long suppressed. A woman who has traveled this path carries a unique energy. She doesn't intentionally save, heal, or inspire. She simply lives in harmony with herself, which feels rare. A man accustomed to women seeking validation is suddenly faced with a world where his value isn't being measured. Her self-worth is not dependent on his achievements. Her presence is not related to his success. She isn't seeking someone to belong to or to complete her. And then something breaks down in him. Old scripts stop working. He can't buy her attention, trigger dependence in her. All he can do is be present if he himself is ready for internal growth. And that's complex but so enticing. Inner wholeness cannot be acted out. It can be sensed in a person's body, skin, voice, even in their silence. A woman who doesn't lose herself in relationships or offer herself up in pieces appeals to something profound, like a mirror reflecting who you are. This is not always pleasant and is often painful, because it becomes clear where you lack a foundation. Her calm exposes your anxieties. Her self-acceptance uncovers your self-rejection. And if a man has the courage not to run, a genuine connection can begin. This kind of woman does not offer security or promise endless support. She is not a mother, therapist, or muse. She is a person who has chosen to be honest with herself, and it is this that makes her so rare. A man may sense that, in her presence, he cannot be superficial. Sooner or later, she'll find it hard to relate to his world of pretense. She will leave, not because she doesn't love, but because she's not betraying herself. And then he either remains in his illusions or plunges deep within himself. This inner wholeness is like a quiet beacon in a stormy sea, never brightly lit, never calling out or luring. But once you've seen it, you will never forget where it is. And even if life takes you in different directions, you'll remember not her face, her voice, or her body, but the way you felt in her presence. Because a true woman doesn't leave traces on the outside. She leaves an imprint within. The man can try to recapture that sensation, seeking it in others, in work, in achievements, but it will not be reproduced, because it wasn't she who gave him the feeling of wholeness. She simply reminded him that it's possible. She awoke his inner desire to become himself. Jung said, "We fall in love not with a person, but with what we become next to them." That is how the archetype operates. A woman who is whole becomes not the object of desire, but the symbol of an inner call. And then love is no longer a game or a drama. It becomes transformation. There are women who seem to stay on the sidelines. They don't rush into relationships. They don't cry out for love. They don't send out rescue signals. It's not indifference, but an internal positioning. They've chosen to be in touch with themselves and not with others' expectations. This kind of woman does not build her life around a man. She's not seduced by promises, or held back by pity, or impressed by the role of savior. She's not trying to be understood by everyone, and there lies her strength. The man feels this profoundly. He can't find the usual hooks. She isn't dependent and doesn't seek validation. She simply is, calm, whole, untouched. This isn't coldness but depth, not detachment, but autonomy, as if to say, "I don't need to be saved." And this phrase, even if unsaid, shatters the archetype of hero that a man so often tries to embody. Jung explained that when a man projects the image of someone to be rescued onto a woman, he isn't seeing the real her. He enters the relationship not with a person, but with his own fantasy. He wants to be needed, important, strong. But a woman who doesn't require saving disrupts this script. She doesn't play along. She doesn't provoke a rescue reaction. She doesn't expose her weaknesses for attention. She guards her internal space. And then the man confronts himself. His role as hero no longer works. He feels unease, uncertainty, and at the same time an immense attraction. Because next to her, he cannot remain superficial. He will have to either grow or leave. She doesn't demand this. She simply lives as she knows how, not getting caught up in other people's games. And that is revolutionary, since most relationships are built on mutual expectations and projections. She's outside of that. When a woman doesn't require to be rescued, it's as if she refuses the role of victim. She takes responsibility for her life, for her wounds, for her healing. That is intimidating, because she doesn't give the man the usual support. "You need me because you're weak." She may be wounded, tired, delicate, vulnerable, but she doesn't ask for compensation. She might talk about her pain, but won't impose it. And then the man finds himself in a space where there's no familiar dynamic. He can't prove his worth through her neediness. He can't build a relationship on a sense of superiority. It puts him before a new choice. He either begins to see the woman as an equal or retreats, because he isn't prepared to let go of the illusion of power. But if he stays, if he accepts her freedom and independence, another form of connection is revealed to him, one based on independence and partnership, not rescue, but respect. A woman who doesn't strive to be rescued, doesn't reject love. She simply doesn't make it the center of her universe. She can be gentle, open, deep, but out of inner fullness, not out of need. This can be sensed in every word, in her silences, in her boundaries. A man who meets a woman like this may first feel redundant, but then he comes to a realization. Next to her, he doesn't have to be someone else. Not a hero, a rescuer, or a knight. Just himself. Vulnerable, growing, alive. That is the real meeting. Jung said that it's only where projections break down that genuine intimacy begins. A woman who remains herself, refusing to play familiar roles, shatters those projections. If the man isn't afraid, if he can remain in that honest space, he will meet not only her, but his true self. There are women who do not get involved. They don't dissolve into a man, strive to please, or lose themselves in relationships. They hold space, neither cold nor repellent, but filled with themselves. It provokes conflicting reactions in men. Attraction on one hand, anxiety on the other. He can't fully understand why she affects him so much. Why, despite her outer simplicity, he wants to get to know her better. Why her silence speaks louder than words. That is because this kind of woman becomes a mirror. She doesn't play at relationships. She simply stays herself, exposing the man, without reproaches, pressure, or hints. Her distance, like litmus paper, shows what is incomplete, broken, or hidden within him. Jung believed that meeting another person is always, first and foremost, a meeting with yourself, but most people aren't ready for that kind of honesty. We seek confirmation, support, and approval. We don't need mirrors. We need storefront windows in which to admire our illusions. But when a man encounters a woman who refuses to participate in this game, he begins to see not her, but himself, his need to be accepted, his desire to control, his insecurity cloaked in a mask of confidence. And in that is pain. Because the myth about himself collapses, because it becomes clear, I am not as strong as I seemed, as whole or as loving. A woman who keeps her distance doesn't do it on purpose. She doesn't play at being unavailable. She simply doesn't enter a relationship through the rejection of herself. And that awakens in the man a desire not to possess, but to know. This distance isn't a wall, but a space in which the man can meet his shadow. She doesn't say, you are not good enough, but by her very existence forces him to ask himself, who am I next to her? Not in terms of social status or success, but in terms of inner substance. This kind of woman doesn't demand, but her silent presence demands maturity, because she doesn't play along, doesn't inspire heroic acts, but inspires honesty. She won't sacrifice herself for the sake of relationships. She won't convince, prove, or pull you in. She will simply live, and in so doing, awaken. Her strength lies in the fact that she doesn't need. It provokes the man to grow, because it is only next to those who demand nothing from us that we can truly open up or run away from ourselves for good. A mirror cannot be convenient. It either reflects the truth or shatters. A woman who stays true to herself becomes such a mirror, and a man who dares to linger in that reflection can undergo an internal transformation. He can see for the first time his dependence on recognition, his inability to be in silence, his anxiety about real intimacy. It is not easy, but it is how the soul matures. Jung said that the path to the self always goes through the destruction of projections. A woman who doesn't dissolve into a man, doesn't agree to the roles assigned to her, shatters those projections, giving him the chance, not to love an illusion, but to meet a person, not to rescue, but to respect, not to achieve, but to be near. And then the distance ceases to be a wall and becomes a bridge, but only one who is willing to leave behind masks, roles, and fears can cross it and encounter his true self. When a man meets a woman who doesn't need confirmation, his internal world begins to waver. He's accustomed to his actions causing a reaction, admiration, gratitude. He knows how to play the roles of protector, intellectual, or someone successful. But something breaks down here. The woman looks at him not with adoration, but with attention. She doesn't try to impress, ask for attention, or demand special treatment. It's as if she's already established herself. This becomes a challenge. Male egos feed on feedback. But there's no usual sustenance with this kind of woman. She doesn't admire without reason, doesn't react wildly, doesn't need to be convinced of something. She may be grateful, but she won't praise just for being there. This is a catastrophe for an immature ego. It searches for a foothold, finds nothing. It demands confirmation of its own significance, but it is met with silence. Jung wrote that our ego is just a tool, but we so often identify with it that we perceive its wounds as our own death. In such encounters with a woman who isn't looking for confirmation, the ego begins to feel pain. She doesn't play by the usual rules. She doesn't need to be rescued, doesn't seek approval, and doesn't conform. Her self-worth isn't dependent on an external perspective. It's as if she's passed through an internal journey that the man is only just beginning. He's faced with a choice: either retreat to a safe space where he continues to be praised and admired, or stay and begin the path to his true self. Because it is beside this kind of woman that it becomes clear how fragile and insatiable the ego is. It wants to be seen and acknowledged, but she doesn't see the roles. She looks deeper. It is a look that you can't hide from. A woman who doesn't need confirmation doesn't turn her independence into a weapon. She simply doesn't expect someone outside of her to give meaning to her life. She is already full. She's capable of being alone. Her self-worth doesn't need proof. She can listen to a man not to assess, but to understand. She can be there not because he's successful or strong, but because she senses something genuine with him. But it's disconcerting, since the usual mechanism of seduction, show yourself in a positive light, the best light, as someone worthy, loses significance. She doesn't assess on a scale of success. She senses the deeper. Everything that was once a support, money, charisma, status, loses its power. Only the person remains, his essence, his intention, his honesty. Being seen without a mask is intimidating. It removes control, but it is in this vulnerability that the chance for real connection appears, where ego battles cease. The ego is afraid of being unrecognized, but beside a woman who doesn't need your recognition, you either break down or are reborn, because she doesn't give you the usual answers, and she doesn't make you the center of her universe. But she can be there with you if you dare to be yourself, not a hero, not an ideal, but alive. Jung said that our shadow is everything that we don't want to acknowledge in ourselves. Meeting it is always painful. However, only by passing through it can we become whole. A woman who doesn't need confirmation unintentionally becomes a guide to this meeting. She doesn't take you by the hand, she follows her path. But if you're ready, you can walk beside her, not to be needed, but to be yourself. That is the greatest challenge the male ego can receive, and the greatest gift, if it accepts it. There are women you can't approach in the usual way. They don't respond to a display of strength, games of charm, or beautiful words, not because they are proud or inaccessible by nature, but because there is a deep maturity in them. It is a special internal state in which there's no need to be understood by everyone. It is a calmness born from pain, self-reflection, and conscious solitude. These women don't repel. They simply don't let in those who come with immature intentions. Their distance is not a whim, but an intuitive way of protecting their wholeness. A man accustomed to easy attention and quick reactions may feel confused. Why isn't she interested? Why doesn't she respond with the same emotion immediately? But there is no game here, no manipulation. It is a maturity that doesn't need anything extra. Jung wrote that a mature personality doesn't seek external confirmation because its center has shifted inward. A woman who knows how to be out of reach doesn't play at being inaccessible for power. She simply doesn't make accessible that which is sacred. She guards her inner world, like a garden that is not open to idle people. If a man wants to be near, he must not conquer but earn it, not with flowers and attention, but with truth and depth. It is a challenge that not everyone is willing to accept. It is easier to find someone who will gravitate towards you, wait and ask. But there is silence here. Not coldness, but clarity. Not indifference, but mature selectivity. This kind of woman is like a mountain. She doesn't move to meet you, but her stability exudes strength, attraction, and peace. Not everyone will climb to that height, but the one who does decide will change forever. Mature distance is not armor, but a space of self-love. It is when a woman is not afraid of being alone because she knows her value is not determined by the presence of a man. She doesn't need a connection to feel alive. That is intimidating, especially to those accustomed to dependence, to the woman responding immediately, giving and dissolving. The deeper you look, the more obvious and present that is. That distance is what makes her genuine. She isn't one to be possessed. She belongs to herself. If she lets you in, it isn't out of a fear of being alone, but out of a desire to share wholeness. This is a maturity that can be scorching, because it doesn't allow the man to feel needed at the expense of someone else's weakness. It offers being beside on equal terms, neither above nor below, but beside. It isn't always comfortable, but it is always real. In a world where relationships are often built on haste, fears, and the need to fill a void, mature distance seems almost like audacity, but it is a silence in which you can hear yourself. A woman who possesses this art becomes more than just interesting. She becomes significant because next to her you can't be halfway. Her inner peace is like a litmus test. It reveals all falsehood. She doesn't fight, prove, or hold back. Her strength is in allowing things to be. If a man is ready for this kind of meeting, she not only opens herself to him, but also himself, through respect, space, and deep connection. Jung wrote that maturity is the ability to hold opposites within, without destroying yourself. A woman who knows how to be unreachable is the embodiment of this idea. She doesn't try to be understood, but if she is understood, it is not chance, but destiny. Jung wrote that we do not fall in love with a person, but we fall in love with a projection, especially in the beginning, when the object of attraction is almost unknown. A man looks at a woman and, without realizing it, puts all of his unconscious contents on her. Ideals, desires, fears, memories. She becomes the anima, the embodiment of the internal feminine principle that lives in his psyche. He doesn't see her, but his inner image. This image can be elevated, passionate, comforting, or whatever, but it has almost nothing to do with the real woman. He doesn't hear what she says. He hears what he wants to hear. He doesn't notice her boundaries. He builds a myth around her. The more he builds it, the more difficult it is to acknowledge that he fell in love, not with a person, but with his own illusion. However, women who know how to maintain distance quickly shed those projections. They don't try to conform, play roles, or try to meet expectations. Their detachment is like a mirror in which a man unexpectedly sees himself, which isn't always what he wanted to see. He was looking for a goddess, but met a living woman, with boundaries, silence, and unpredictability. He expected her to become an extension of his fantasy, but she refuses to be part of someone else's dream. In this moment, there is an internal crisis. The illusion collapses. But it is in this destruction that there is a chance, because it is only through the loss of fantasy that you can get closer to the real other, not a projection, but a person. If the man remains, doesn't run away, doesn't blame, he begins to mature. The process of the collapse of projections is painful. It is almost like a loss of love, although in reality, it is the illusion that is disappearing. The man may experience disappointment, anger, and resentment. He feels that he was tricked, but in reality he tricked himself. The woman didn't promise to be ideal, she was just herself. But the ego can't distinguish fantasy from reality. It wants the image to live on, the story to continue. However, real intimacy requires something else. Patience, openness, a willingness to face the shadow. A woman who doesn't dissolve into male expectations becomes the reason for this awakening. She doesn't support the game, and thus helps the man get out of it. If he decides to stay, a real meeting will begin, not with a fairy tale anima, but with himself and her, living, imperfect, and real. Jung said that only someone who can destroy a projection is capable of love, because love begins where fantasy ends. It is in this sense that a woman who doesn't become convenient makes the greatest gift. She refuses to be an image and becomes herself. This provokes the man towards maturity. She's as if she's saying, "You can see me for real, or continue to love your illusion. The choice is yours." If he chooses to see, something amazing happens. The illusion disappears, but in its place something greater appears. Respect, interest, depth. It is no longer an attraction to an image, but a desire to get to know, touch, and be near a real person. This path is not easy, but it opens the space for genuine connection, not through projection, but through a meeting of souls. There are women near whom you sense a strange mix of lightness and unreachability. They don't cling, try to hold you back, or get attached in the usual way. Their freedom is not in words, but in their state. This is neither opposition to relationships nor a fear of intimacy. It is an inner feeling. I belong to myself. This freedom becomes something elusive, beckoning to the man. He can't understand why she draws him so much. She doesn't do anything special. However, there is power in her independence that cannot be faked. It is like the wind. You can't grasp it with your hands, but you feel its touch, and it awakens you. A woman who lives in harmony with herself doesn't become the center of a man's universe. In that is the paradox. Because she doesn't make herself dependent, she becomes significant. Jung believed that in the male unconscious, the image of a woman is often connected to the archetype of freedom, not one that cries about her independence, but one that simply is. She doesn't need recognition, struggle, or approval. She lives, moves, and chooses. This image, deeply rooted in the psyche, provokes a contradictory reaction. Admiration on the one hand, a fear of losing control on the other, since this kind of woman cannot be held back by promises, jealousy, or dramas. She doesn't live in those scenarios. She is above them. A man who encounters this strength is faced with a challenge. Be there, not possessing, controlling, or subjugating. Only in that way can he keep her near, giving her the freedom to be herself. This requires courage, maturity, and a willingness to leave the familiar game. Sometimes men release such women, not because they don't love them, but because they don't know how to be near without possessing. They call them too complicated, incomprehensible, too free. But deep down, a trace of that meeting remains, because a woman in whom freedom lives changes not outwardly, but inwardly. She awakens. Even if the man leaves, he will no longer be the same. He has faced something that cannot be tamed, opening his eyes to how dependent, unwhole, and unsure he is. He may lie to himself, deny, say that she doesn't care. However, the truth is that she simply doesn't play at subjugation. If he ever matures, he may return, not for her, but to himself, because freedom inspires and requires responsibility. Being with this kind of woman is not about possession, but about choice every day. A woman's freedom is not a rejection of love, but a form of love for herself. It is not indifference, but the ability not to lose yourself even in a strong attachment. This kind of woman can love deeply, sincerely, and devotedly. However, her love will never be dependent. She won't say, "Without you, I am nothing." She will say, "With you, I am more than I was. But even without you, I am whole." That is both intimidating and wonderful. A man accustomed to being the whole life for someone suddenly realizes that here he is not the center, but a part of a whole. If he is ready to become a part, not striving to dominate, he receives something unbelievable, a union of two free souls. This is rare. It's not something that builds quickly. However, if built, it will not be destroyed, because it is based not on need, but on choice, and a choice made from a free heart is the strongest attraction possible. From childhood, women are taught to be correct, convenient, obedient, nice, to smile when they don't want to give way when it hurts, and to say yes when the inner voice says no. The collective unconscious, of which Jung wrote, dictates what a woman should be. These images are built into the culture, families, and fabric of society. Be desirable, but not too accessible. Be successful, but not threatening. Be loving, but not demanding. When a woman suddenly chooses not to follow these expectations, she faces resistance. The world doesn't like those who leave the script. However, this is the moment that this kind of woman in this system becomes truly alive. She no longer plays roles. She refuses to be a projection. She is herself. This, as Jung wrote, awakens archetypal anxiety in those around her because it destroys the order that seemed eternal. This kind of woman can seem inconvenient. She doesn't rush to explain or justify herself. She doesn't strive to please. She won't play the role of the ideal wife, mother, or partner if those roles go against her inner truth. She makes a choice for which she pays with freedom, loneliness, and sometimes condemnation. But in that price is a deep power. She lives according to her truth, not someone else's scenarios. She doesn't fit into the familiar framework. This provokes an internal conflict in the man. On the one hand, he is drawn to her authenticity. On the other, he wants her to become understandable. But she is not for understanding, she is for experiencing. This kind of woman is like a myth, or like fire. If you get too close, you can get burned. But to stay on the sidelines means to remain forever in the cold of your own projections. Jung argued that a real meeting is possible only when both sides go beyond collective roles. Women who don't fit into the system give a man the opportunity to realize the degree to which he is held hostage by expectations. He may try to get her back in place with advice, criticism, or manipulation. He may say that she needs to be simpler, to remember her destiny, and behave like a woman. However, her silence, her peace, and her presence in herself is not a protest, but a power. It is an invitation, not to force her to change, but to look inside yourself. She is a challenge for his ego, because next to her he cannot simply be a man by default. He must become whole, stop playing the role of hero, savior, or provider. He must become himself. Only then is genuine intimacy possible between them, based not on roles, but on reality. These women change not with words, but with the very fact of their existence. They are not aggressive or hostile, they are simply different. They follow their path, without looking back or asking for permission, and there is a special magic in that path. It is not a struggle with the world, it is a return to oneself. This is what is frightening. If a woman can be happy without approval, dependence, or external recognition, then others can too, which means that the entire system built on control and fear loses its power. A woman outside the system is not just a person, she is a symbol. She is a new model of femininity, free, deep, and whole. A man who is able to see this won't lose her, because he understands. He didn't meet just a woman, but a person living in the truth, and next to the truth is always quiet, deep, and real.